Have you ever clicked on a real estate listing and felt a flutter of something more than just curiosity? Like maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just a house, but the start of something bigger? That's exactly where this story begins. But hold on, because what starts as a classic bidding war for a suburban dream home turns into something no one, not even the people involved, could have ever predicted. This isn't just about property lines and price tags. This is about how two complete strangers, locked in a heated, emotionally charged race to own the same house, found themselves entangled in something far more valuable than square footage or curb appeal. If you've ever believed that love can be found in the most unexpected places, buckle in. Because what you're about to hear will have you questioning whether the universe has a strange sense of humor, or an uncanny plan. Hey you. Yeah, you watching this right now. Maybe on your couch with a cup of coffee, or in your car during a lunch break, just looking for a little entertainment or inspiration. Let me tell you up front, the question that brought you here? How did a simple house bidding war turn into a love story? That answer? You're going to get it. But trust me, it's not a straight line. It's layered, emotional, messy, and somehow still magical. You're going to laugh. You might get a little mad. You might even cry. But one thing I promise? You'll stay glued to this story because you're going to feel like you're right in it, living every moment, just like they did. You see, this story taps into something deeply psychological. Something all of us understand, whether we admit it or not. That longing for a place to call home. Not just a structure but a sense of safety. Belonging. And sometimes, that pursuit collides with another human being's dream. And the sparks that fly aren't always the kind you'd expect. What happens when two people want the exact same thing, for totally different reasons? What happens when neither is willing to back down, but instead of destroying each other in the process, they find connection? That's the kind of story this is. A real-life slow burn that started with competitive offers, anxious open houses, and late-night emails to realtors, and ended in a way that no one, not even the neighbors, saw coming. So let me introduce you to the two key people at the heart of this roller coaster. First, there's Emily Westbrook, a 31-year-old interior designer with a sharp eye, a bigger heart, and a dream that was about more than just buying her first house. After a rough breakup that left her emotionally drained and financially cautious, she'd finally gotten her footing again. This wasn't just a house to her. It was her reset. Her independence. Her comeback. She had visions of a reading nook by the bay window, of sipping wine in the backyard after a long day's work, of inviting friends over for dinner parties where laughter filled the kitchen. This place represented hope, and she wasn't going to let anyone take it from her. And then there's Daniel Hayes, 35, an investment consultant with a calm exterior and a deeply buried grief he hadn't allowed himself to confront in years. The house he had his eye on? It wasn't random. It was 5 blocks from the one his late sister had lived in. She'd always told him to slow down, to settle, to build a life outside of numbers and noise. And now, finally, he was ready to listen. This house was his chance to do that. He pictured himself planting a garden like hers, maybe even fostering dogs like she used to. It wasn't just about equity or location. It was about honoring her, and maybe healing himself. Neither of them knew the other. But their stories, separate and sacred, were about to collide. And that collision? It would start with a red front door. Picture it. A Sunday afternoon open house. The sun is casting long shadows on the driveway. Inside, the place smells like freshly baked cookies and just cleaned floors. Emily walks in first, her eyes darting around, taking mental snapshots. Her heart does a little flip. This is it. She just knows. A few minutes later, Daniel walks in. His face is unreadable, but something softens in his gaze as he steps into the same living room. They don't speak. They barely register each other. But in that moment, standing in the same space, both feel something inevitable. You might be thinking, okay, I get it. They're both interested in the same house. Big deal. So are lots of buyers in a hot market. But no. This wasn't a normal real estate drama. This wasn't just two competing bids on Zillow or a last-minute counteroffer. What happened next turned the usual rules of engagement upside down. Because when Emily's agent called to tell her there was another offer on the house, and that the buyer was escalating aggressively, she didn't back down. And when Daniel heard the same news from his side, he felt the first flicker of something he hadn't felt in years. Fire. The bidding war started quietly at first. Emails, escalation clauses, subtle raises. But then things got personal. Both of them, unknowingly, began to write letters to the seller. Emotional, raw letters about why this house mattered to them. Letters that unknowingly mirrored each other's grief, hopes, and longing. The seller, a sharp, retired teacher named June, read them both. And instead of choosing the highest bid, she did something no one expected. She invited both buyers to come back. At the same time. That's when everything changed. You'll see how two people went from being silent rivals in a high-stakes game to slowly, hesitantly, reluctantly starting to understand each other. You'll witness their walls, built from years of heartbreak, disappointment, and guarded independence, begin to crack, brick by emotional brick. There's something deeply vulnerable about wanting the same thing someone else does. It creates a tension that's hard to explain. But when you're forced to see the humanity in your so-called opponent, that tension turns into curiosity. And curiosity? Well, that can change everything. You're going to watch how Emily, who had trained herself not to rely on anyone, started to see something familiar in Daniel's quiet sadness. And Daniel, who had forgotten what it felt like to truly connect, found himself listening more closely to Emily's laughter than the numbers on the offer sheet. Their negotiations turned into conversations. Their rivalry turned into something else entirely. And when one of them made a selfless move no one saw coming, it shifted everything, and made the other ask a question they'd never dared voice before. What if we stopped fighting against each other, and started fighting for each other? But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because just when you think you know how this story is going to unfold, just when it seems like compromise might lead to connection and that connection might lead to something beautiful, everything takes a sharp turn. A past relationship resurfaces. A secret is revealed. One of them disappears. And the house? The very thing that brought them together? Suddenly, it becomes a battleground not of love, but of loyalty, fear, and choices that will test everything they've begun to build. I told you at the beginning. You're going to get your answer. You will. But it's not going to come easy. Because real love stories, especially the ones born from conflict, are never simple. They're earned. They're messy. They take guts. And you right now, you're not just a viewer. You're part of this. You're going to feel it. Because deep down, we've all been there. Chasing something, fighting for it, not knowing that what we really needed was standing right next to us the whole time. So now the only question is, when it all came down to the final decision, house or heart, which one did they choose? You're about to find out. But first, something happened on the day of the final offer that no one, and I mean no one, saw coming. And it changed everything. It started as just another Sunday, but for Emily, the air had felt electric since she stepped out of her apartment that morning. Her realtor had called with a hint of urgency in her voice, saying the seller had one more slot for a private walkthrough, and Emily had to move fast. The market was hot, flooded with eager buyers chasing after the same limited number of charming homes with open floor plans, updated kitchens, and walkable neighborhoods. The kind of homes that racked up views on YouTube house tours and sparked real estate bidding wars before the listing was even 48 hours old. She'd already been outbid twice in the past month, and both times it had felt like losing more than just a house. It felt like losing a future she could almost touch. She wasn't going to let that happen again. Not this time. She'd packed a coffee and a folder of mortgage pre-approvals, threw on a confident smile, and told herself this was the day her life would finally start shifting forward again. What Emily didn't know as she pulled up to the tidy brick home with the red front door was that she wasn't the only one with history trailing behind her like a shadow. Across town, Daniel had also been called by his agent, who told him the seller was torn between two offers and wanted a face-to-face impression. That in itself was odd. It wasn't standard protocol, especially in such a competitive market, but Daniel agreed. Truth be told, he welcomed the distraction. Since his sister's passing 2 years earlier, he'd immersed himself in work, pushing down his emotions under financial projections and deadlines. But this house, it reminded him so much of her. The backyard garden space, the sloped roof, even the creaky old oak tree out front. It felt like a sign. He hadn't told anyone, not even his agent, but he planned to buy this place and start the non-profit his sister had always dreamed of launching. An after-school program for kids in the neighborhood. This house wasn't just about square footage. It was about redemption. When Emily and Daniel walked into the house that day, seconds apart but worlds away, they weren't just two buyers circling a property. They were two stories, two wounds, two dreams converging without warning. And June, the sharp-eyed seller who'd lived there for 40 years, saw it all. She was no stranger to intuition. As a retired school counselor, she'd spent decades reading teenagers better than they read themselves. She saw the way Emily's fingers lingered on the kitchen countertops, how her eyes softened when she looked out the bay window. And she saw Daniel, hands in pockets, absorbing the room like someone carrying a quiet weight. June wasn't interested in selling her home to the highest bidder. She wanted to pass it on to someone who needed it. Really needed it. As the visit wound down, June did something unconventional. She invited them to sit together in the backyard. Emily raised a brow. Daniel hesitated. But neither declined. June made iced tea and brought it out like a hostess entertaining old friends. It was awkward at first, the silence stretching between Emily and Daniel, both aware of the strange setup. Two competitors in a real-life love triangle, with the house as the prize. But the awkwardness slowly melted as June spoke about her life, the memories made in the house, the small moments that had meant the most. Burnt pies at Thanksgiving, summer storms, family game nights. The stories anchored them, made the house feel alive, almost sacred. And for the first time, Emily and Daniel stopped seeing each other as threats and started seeing each other as human. Still, the tension lingered. Neither wanted to give up the house. That night, both sent their final letters to June. Unfiltered, emotional, honest. But something else happened too. Emily found herself Googling Daniel's name, not to get a leg up, but out of curiosity. She stumbled across a podcast episode where he'd been a guest speaker, talking about resilience in business and life. His voice was calm, steady, but there was something vulnerable underneath it. Meanwhile, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about the way Emily had laughed when June had joked about raccoons in the attic. It wasn't just her laugh, it was how easily she'd allowed herself to be amused, how present she seemed. That night, he reread her letter to the seller. June had shared it, with permission, and it moved him more than he cared to admit. That's when things began to twist. 3 days later, Emily got a call. Not from her agent, but from a woman claiming to be Daniel's ex-fiancé. Her voice was clipped, urgent. She said she'd seen Emily's name on a real estate forum and thought she should know who she was competing with. The woman hinted at past betrayals, said Daniel had a habit of starting over without ever finishing what he left behind. Emily was shaken. The timing felt too coincidental. Was this jealousy? Or a warning? Around the same time, Daniel received an email from a blocked sender. An old colleague who claimed Emily had once been sued by a former client over a failed design project. Do your research, it said. She's not as wholesome as she looks. Daniel didn't believe it, not really, but it planted a seed. Were they being set up? Was someone trying to derail both of them? But why? Suddenly, this wasn't just a bidding war. It was something deeper. There were whispers of manipulation, fragments of someone else's agenda. A subplot none of them had signed up for. And in the middle of it all, June stayed silent. No decision. No callbacks. Just quiet. As if she was waiting for something neither of them could see yet. And then, just as Emily was about to withdraw her offer, tired, confused, emotionally frayed, she got a text from Daniel. It was simple. Can we talk? She agreed, but insisted they meet somewhere neutral. They chose a bookstore cafe downtown. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't tense. It was real. They talked. 4 hours. About everything. About the house, the exes, the emails. About their fears. Their regrets. Their stubbornness. And something shifted. Not in a dramatic cinematic way, but in the quiet, undeniable way that two people begin to trust each other. Not as rivals, but as mirrors. Yet the clock was still ticking. The housing market was ruthless. New listings came and went like wildfire. And behind the scenes, June had her own plan in motion. Unbeknownst to Emily and Daniel, she'd reached out to her lawyer to add an amendment to her will. Something involving the house, something neither buyer saw coming. And then, the day before her final decision, June vanished. Her agent couldn't reach her. Her phone went straight to voicemail. A neighbor claimed she'd seen June getting into a car with out-of-state plates. No one knew where she was. Panic simmered. Was she okay? Did she change her mind? Did she sell the house to someone else entirely? Emily and Daniel met again, this time not as buyers, but as two people caught in something larger than themselves. The house had brought them together. But now, it was tearing at the edges of something they hadn't yet defined. Something that might be love, or might just be the illusion of it. And just when they were beginning to let down their guards completely, a letter arrived. Handwritten. No return address. One envelope. Two names. The envelope sat between them like a loaded question neither of them had the answer to. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she unfolded the letter for a second time, rereading the words even though she'd already memorized them. Asterisk, you'll find the truth buried in the garden. Asterisk, there was no signature, no clue as to who sent it, only the unmistakable loop of handwriting that didn't match June's neat cursive. Daniel leaned in, scanning the page. His expression unreadable, but his eyes flicked to hers with a shared urgency neither of them could ignore. They both knew what it meant. They had to go back. Not just to the house, but to the garden that had felt so serene the day of the backyard tea. Only now, it held the weight of something hidden, something carefully tucked away beneath layers of soil and time. The real estate drama that had once felt like the main story now seemed like a decoy. Because this wasn't just about a bidding war anymore. This was about a secret, something June had kept, something she wanted them to uncover together. They waited until dusk before making their way back to the house. It was technically still for sale, though the front door had remained locked and untouched since June's disappearance. Her car was gone, the curtains drawn, the mailbox empty. Emily felt a chill creep up her spine as they crept around to the backyard. The garden looked exactly as they remembered it. Neatly arranged rows of perennials, a worn bench, a stone birdbath tilted slightly to one side. But now, it was charged with an eerie sense of purpose. They didn't bring shovels, just their bare hands and an adrenaline rush that pushed them to their knees. Emily began digging near the hydrangeas, Daniel by the small wooden fence where June had mentioned she once buried time capsules with her late husband. It wasn't long before Daniel's fingers hit something hard. A small tin box, rusted around the edges, barely the size of a paperback book. He pulled it out slowly, brushing off the dirt. Emily moved beside him as he cracked it open. Inside, they found old photographs, faded receipts, a folded newspaper clipping, and a bundle of letters wrapped in red string. At first, it looked like a nostalgic collection, until they read the headline on the clipping. Asterisk, local man missing after alleged real estate fraud. Asterisk, the article was dated 15 years ago. The man's name? Martin Kessler, June's late husband. And suddenly, everything they thought they knew shattered. According to the article, Martin had been under investigation for defrauding several buyers during a housing boom, allegedly falsifying documents to sell the same property to multiple people. The investigation had grown hot, but before charges could be filed, Martin had disappeared without a trace. His car was found near a bridge out of state, but no body was ever recovered. The case had gone cold, and rumors had swirled for years. Some believed he'd fled the country, others claimed he'd met with foul play. And now, here was evidence that June had known more than she let on. The letters, dated months after Martin's disappearance, were all from him. Some were apologies, some filled with desperate instructions, and one detailed a hidden bank account tied to real estate profits that had never been reported. He begged June not to turn him in. He told her he had a plan. But the letters stopped abruptly mid-thought, like a record skipping just before the final verse. Emily and Daniel sat in stunned silence, the gravity of what they'd just uncovered slowly settling over them. This house, the one they'd been fighting for, the one that had somehow stitched their lives together, it wasn't just a home. It was a vault. A piece of unfinished business from a forgotten crime. And June? She hadn't vanished out of fear or confusion. She had orchestrated something. Something deliberate. But why now? Why involve them? Unless this was her way of unburdening herself. Or worse, her way of passing on a legacy she could no longer carry. Meanwhile, back in the city, rumors had begun swirling online. A viral TikTok from a local influencer mentioned a mysterious bidding war-turned-love story, involving a missing seller and hidden documents. Emily's name had been tagged in the comments, her face scraped from a realtor's Facebook post. A YouTube Shorts creator picked up the story, adding wild speculation and conspiracy theories involving inheritance fraud, hidden treasure, and secret lovers. The drama was trending under real estate keywords like dream home gone wrong and asterisk house with a hidden past. Asterisk, the pressure mounted fast. Strangers were watching, speculating, commenting. Suddenly, Their story wasn't just emotional. It was public. Daniel's phone lit up with an unknown number. Then another, and another. Reporters. Curious true crime podcasters. Former clients of Martin Kessler's who had their own stories to tell. The garden discovery had triggered a chain reaction, one that neither Emily nor Daniel was prepared for. They were now keepers of a story that no longer belonged just to them. And through it all, the house stood quiet, its windows reflecting the setting sun, as if waiting for them to decide what came next. But amidst the chaos, something else stirred. Something more intimate, more confusing. Emily and Daniel, once cautious allies, now found themselves pulled together not by coincidence but by shared obligation. Late nights became routine, deciphering letters, researching property deeds, arguing over what to do with the evidence. But with each passing day, the line between partnership and something deeper blurred. It wasn't just about solving a mystery or protecting the house anymore. It was about the way she paused when he spoke, the way he lingered before leaving, the unspoken understanding that their lives had intertwined beyond explanation. Still, trust came slowly. When Daniel suggested going public with what they found, Emily recoiled. She didn't want their story to become clickbait. She'd spent years rebuilding her reputation after a former client tried to smear her design business online. She couldn't go through that again. Daniel, meanwhile, was facing his own demons. A high-profile investment client had started asking questions about his involvement in the house story, and his firm wasn't pleased with the attention. His career hung in the balance. And then, the real twist landed like thunder. A new document surfaced, a legal amendment to the house's deed, filed quietly just days before June's disappearance. It listed Emily and Daniel not as potential buyers, but as co-beneficiaries of the estate, with equal rights to ownership, and an unusual clause. They could only sell the house if both agreed. Until then, it belonged to them jointly. The house was no longer on the market. It was theirs. Together. The shock of it hit hard. June hadn't chosen one of them. She had chosen both. Tied them together with a legal thread that couldn't easily be broken. And now they had no choice but to face not only each other, but the growing legacy of secrets buried in the walls of the home they both claimed to love. And just as they began to grapple with this revelation, a neighbor stepped forward. An elderly man who lived 2 doors down. He said he'd seen June leave in the middle of the night, but she wasn't alone. A man had been with her. Tall. Gray-haired. Limping slightly. Looked just like Martin. Could it be? Before Emily could ask more, before Daniel could investigate further, the neighbor handed them something. A key. Not to the house, but to the old tool shed behind the garden. June had told him to give it to whoever came closest to understanding the truth. And now, with everything on the line, the house, their reputations, their fragile connection, they were about to open a door that might destroy what little sense of control they had left. Whatever was in that shed. It was the missing piece. Or the final crack in everything. Stay close, because what they find next will change not only how this story ends, but how it all truly began. Emily hesitated at the door of the tool shed, the heavy iron key cold in her palm. Daniel stood beside her. His expression tense, lips pressed into a line that betrayed how hard he was trying to stay composed. The shed was old, its wooden boards warped and worn with age, the hinges rusted from years of exposure to the elements. Whatever June had hidden inside, it had been kept in the shadows for a reason. With a deep breath, Emily turned the key. The lock clicked open with a reluctant groan, and she slowly pushed the door inward. Dust danced in the narrow beam of light that spilled in from outside, and the air inside was stale, thick with the scent of earth, rust, and secrets. They stepped in together, silent, alert. The first thing they noticed was a collection of boxes, some labeled with dates, others with names. Beneath an old tarp in the corner, Daniel uncovered a file cabinet, locked but pried open just enough to reveal the contents inside. What they found wasn't just the smoking gun of Martin Kessler's past crimes, it was a trove of meticulously documented evidence. Forged property deeds, fake IDs, offshore account ledgers, and stacks of cash wrapped in brittle rubber bands. There were photos, too. Grainy surveillance stills of Martin meeting with people, possibly clients, possibly accomplices. But what chilled them both to the bone was a set of videotapes, labeled not with names, but with addresses. One of them matched the address of the house they stood behind. As Daniel loaded the first tape into an old portable player sitting atop a crate, the screen flickered to life. The footage was dated 15 years ago, and it showed June, young, vibrant, and terrified, arguing with Martin inside the house. There was shouting, accusations, and then silence. Martin stormed out, and the tape cut to black. Another clip showed June burying something in the garden. Not a body. Papers, documents, items she must have known could destroy him. It all came together at once. Martin hadn't disappeared of his own free will. June had driven him away. Not physically, but through sheer resolve. She had gathered everything, made copies, and told him that if he ever returned, she'd take it all to the police. He left that night, likely expecting to return later and silence her, but June had moved faster. She changed her identity, forged new documents, and used her background in counseling to quietly manipulate the narrative around his vanishing. 4 years, she lived with the weight of it all. Waiting, watching, guarding. And now, she had chosen Emily and Daniel to carry that burden forward. Not just to expose the truth, but to make something meaningful out of the mess she'd spent decades hiding. In the following days, everything spiraled. The media frenzy erupted once again as Emily and Daniel went public, cautiously, sharing only the pieces that needed to be known. They turned over the evidence to authorities, who reopened the cold case. Headlines across YouTube, TikTok, and Twitter. Asterisk, missing man tied to real estate fraud found alive? Asterisk, shot to trending status. Their story was featured in a viral YouTube documentary titled, The House That Held a Secret, and overnight, the quiet bidding war that started it all became the centerpiece of a nationwide conversation about trust, legacy, and redemption. The house itself became a landmark. People drove by just to see it. But Emily and Daniel weren't interested in fame. They were trying to process what it meant to be tied together by something so unlikely, so impossibly real. And then, the final twist came not in a letter or a buried box, but in a quiet knock on the door one rainy afternoon. June. Alive. Frail, thinner, but clear-eyed and composed. She stepped inside as if she had never left and sat them down at the kitchen table like old friends. She explained everything. Not with shame, but with the calm clarity of someone who had finally stopped running. She'd left to force them into action, to see what they would choose to do with what they found. She believed the house needed guardians, not owners. And she believed, somehow, that they would find each other in the middle of it all. She wasn't wrong. In the months that followed, Emily and Daniel didn't just move into the house. They turned it into something new. The garden, once a grave for secrets, became a gathering place for neighborhood kids as they launched a non-profit in June's name. The Red Door Project, focused on housing justice, financial literacy, and community mentorship. The rooms that once echoed with silence now rang with laughter, purpose, and growth. Emily revived her design business with a focus on sustainable renovations, while Daniel pivoted from finance into social impact work. Together, they rebuilt not just the house, but their futures. And yes, somewhere along the way, what started as tension evolved into trust. And then quietly, into love. Not the rushed kind. The kind built on understanding, on shared struggle and unexpected connection. They were different, but they were better together. Proven not by romance, but by resilience. So to everyone who stayed with this story till the end, this wasn't just about a house. It was about what happens when you fight for something real, even when the odds seem stacked against you. It was about how one unexpected moment, one strange twist of fate, can set off a chain reaction that changes your life forever. And it was about the people we meet along the way. Sometimes rivals, sometimes partners, sometimes the very thing we didn't know we needed. The house that started it all still stands. But its story? That belongs to all of us now. And if you ever find yourself in the middle of your own bidding war, over a dream, a future, or maybe even a heart, remember this. Sometimes the prize isn't what you get. It's who you become trying to win it.